You've embarrassed this family long enough. I want you out of this house by Sunday." My father said it the way he said most things, quietly, like it wasn't worth raising his voice over. That was somehow worse than yelling. He set his fork down. My mother didn't look at me. She just stared at her plate, and I knew she agreed with every word. I was 31 years old, sitting at a dinner table I'd sat at 1,000 times before, and my father was asking me to leave like I was a tenant who'd missed too many payments. My name is Audrey Wells, and that Sunday was the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to me. I just didn't know it yet. Let me back up. I grew up in a household where success looked exactly one way. My father had spent 30 years as a civil engineer. My mother had a degree in accounting and worked part-time for a tax firm. My older brother had followed the blueprint perfectly. Engineering degree from Penn State, a job at a firm in Philadelphia, a house in the suburbs, a wife, 2 kids. My parents kept a photo of his graduation on the mantle in the living room. I used to walk past it every day. I had tried the blueprint. I enrolled in a business program at a state university when I was 18 and lasted 2.5 years before I ran out of the ability to pretend I cared. Not because I was lazy, not because it was hard. I left because I had spent those 2.5 years building something on the side that was growing faster than I could manage while also attending classes. I had started an online resale business when I was 19. It began with vintage clothing. Stuff I found at estate sales and Goodwill stores, cleaned up, photographed properly, and sold on platforms like eBay and Poshmark for 3 to 5 times what I paid. By the time I was 20, I had figured out the pattern well enough to expand into furniture, collectibles, and eventually small antiques. By 21, I was averaging around $4,000 a month in profit. By the time I left school, that number had nearly doubled. I never told my parents exactly how much I was making. Partly because I didn't think they'd understand the business model. Partly because every time I had tried to explain it, my mother would say something like, "That's a nice little hobby, sweetheart," and my father would change the subject to my brother's latest project at work. So I stopped explaining. It was easier that way. After I left school, I moved back home temporarily. That was the plan: save money, grow the business, eventually get my own place. Temporary turned into a year, then 2. Not because I couldn't afford to leave, but because I was pouring every dollar I could back into inventory. Every sale funded the next purchase. I was building something, but it didn't look like anything from the outside. From the outside, I was a college dropout living in her childhood bedroom, driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic wearing thrifted clothes, which in my case was also inventory research. But my family didn't see it that way. My father started making comments around the time I turned 28. Small ones at first. He'd mention someone from the neighborhood who had just gotten promoted, then look at me for a moment longer than necessary. My mother would ask if I'd thought about going back to school, or maybe looking into an office position somewhere. I had business accounts across 6 platforms. I had a storage unit that functioned as a warehouse, organized by category and acquisition date. I had spreadsheets that tracked cost basis, margin, average sell-through time, and platform fees. I had a rating of 99.8% on eBay with over 4,000 completed transactions. None of that was visible from my childhood bedroom. The comments got worse when my brother and his wife had their second baby. Suddenly, every family gathering became an occasion to compare. My mother would talk about how my sister-in-law had gone back to work after her maternity leave. "She's so driven." And then look at me in a way that suggested I was the cautionary tale she was glad not to be. My father's favorite phrase became, "At your age. At your age, your brother had already been promoted twice. At your age, most people have established themselves. At your age." I tried a few times to say something. Once I mentioned that I had just made a deal to supply a small antique dealer in New Jersey with a regular rotation of pieces I curated. My father asked how much the dealer was paying me. When I told him the monthly retainer, there was a pause, and then he said, "That's barely more than minimum wage." He wasn't entirely wrong about the math for that one contract. He was completely wrong about the larger picture, but I didn't push back. The dinner where everything fell apart happened on a Thursday in October. My brother and his wife were visiting for the weekend. My aunt had driven up from Maryland. It was a normal family dinner until it wasn't. My aunt asked me, with genuine warmth, how things were going. She had always been kind to me, even when she didn't fully understand what I did. Before I could answer, my mother laughed lightly. We're all still trying to figure that out. My aunt looked uncertain. She glanced at me. I smiled and started to say something about a recent auction I'd done well at. My father put his glass down. The problem, he said. Not loudly, not cruelly. Just flatly, the way an engineer states a fact, is that you've never committed to anything. You quit school, you've been running a garage sale operation for 10 years. At some point, you have to ask yourself why nothing sticks. My brother looked down at his plate. That's not really fair, my sister-in-law said quietly, and I was grateful for it. I'm not being unfair, my father said. I'm being honest. Your sister has wasted the better part of a decade. The kindest thing I can do is say it plainly. I sat very still. My mother shook her head slowly. We just worry about you, that's all. And then my father said the thing he said. He looked at me across the table and said, You are an embarrassment to this family. I mean that. Not out of cruelty. Because it is the truth. The table went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator running in the kitchen. My aunt looked horrified. My brother opened his mouth and then closed it. My sister-in-law put her hand on her wine glass and didn't pick it up. I looked at my father. I waited to see if he would soften it, qualify it, pull it back even slightly. He didn't. He picked up his fork. If you're not going to change direction, he said, then I think it's time you found your own place. I mean that respectfully. You're 31 years old. I put my napkin on the table. I said, okay, and I meant it. I went upstairs. I started packing what I needed. I wasn't angry. I was something else. Something quieter and colder than anger. I was done. What my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 6 weeks earlier, I had signed a lease on a warehouse space in a business district in Allentown. I had spent 2 years turning my resale operation into something else entirely. A curated vintage and antique e-commerce company with a growing wholesale arm. I had an LLC. I had a business bank account that had crossed 6 figures in annual revenue the prior year and was on track to nearly double that by December. I had 2 part-time contractors who helped me photograph and list inventory. I had just started talking to a boutique hotel chain in the Mid-Atlantic region about supplying decorative antiques for their properties. I had been doing all of this from my childhood bedroom, and my father had no idea. I did not tell him any of this as I walked out the door on Saturday morning, one day ahead of his Sunday deadline, because I had never needed to prove anything on anyone else's schedule. I loaded my car, hugged my aunt, who was standing in the driveway looking like she might cry, and drove away. The next 3 months were the busiest of my life. I moved into an apartment 2 blocks from the new warehouse. I worked 15-hour days. I finalized the hotel contract. 12 properties, rotating inventory, a recurring quarterly order that alone would generate more money than I had made in my first 3 years of business combined. I hired a 3rd contractor. I brought on a bookkeeper. I did not call home, neither did they. The way my parents found out happened, the way most things in life happen. Not dramatically, not the way you'd write it in a story, but sideways and by accident. My brother had a colleague, someone from his firm, who was involved in a regional business association in Pennsylvania. The association was putting together a feature on small business owners who had scaled without traditional funding. Someone had nominated my company. I hadn't done it myself. I think it was the hotel chain's procurement contact who had mentioned us to someone. I had done a short interview over email, answered some questions, and mostly forgotten about it because I was busy. The feature ran in the association's quarterly print magazine and on their website. The headline was something about bootstrapped businesses in the region. My company name was in it. My name was in it. There was a small photo. Me standing in front of shelving units in the warehouse. My brother recognized me immediately. He called me. I let it ring twice, then answered. Is this real? He said before I could say hello. The magazine thing? Yeah. There was a long pause. How long has this been going on? The warehouse? About 4 months. The business itself? About 10 years. He was quiet for a moment. Dad saw it, he said finally. His colleague forwarded it to him. Something about knowing someone in Allentown who does business with the hotel group. I sat down at my desk. Okay, I said. He wants to come see it, my brother said. Both of them do. I told them, I'd ask you first. I thought about that for a long moment. Part of me wanted to say no. I had spent years not needing their approval, and I had mostly learned not to miss it. But there was another part, smaller, quieter, the part that had sat at that dinner table and said nothing when I should have said everything. That wanted them to see it. Not to gloat. To close something. Tell them they can come Thursday, I said. They arrived at 11 in the morning. My brother came with them, which I hadn't expected but was glad for. I met them at the door of the warehouse. My mother was holding her purse with both hands, which she only does when she's nervous. My father had a look on his face I didn't have a word for immediately, but later I figured out what it was. It was the look of someone trying to understand something that doesn't fit the map they've been using. I gave them a tour. I showed them the intake area where I processed and cataloged new acquisitions. I showed them the photography setup, the lights, the backdrops, the system for consistent images across every platform. I showed them the shelving, organized by category and condition rating. I walked them through the packing and shipping station. I showed them the office corner where I had a monitor displaying the dashboard I used to track listings, sales, and inventory movement in real time. My mother kept looking at things and then looking at me, like she was trying to reconcile two different images. My father didn't say much. He walked slowly, looked carefully, asked one or two precise questions: square footage, lease terms, volume per month. Engineer questions. I answered them plainly. My brother hung back a little. At one point, he caught my eye and gave me a small nod, and I understood what he was saying. I nodded back. We ended up in the office corner. I had a small table and chairs there for when contractors came by to work. We sat down. Someone should have said something, and nobody did for a moment. My mother spoke first. She looked at the monitor and then at me. Why didn't you tell us? She asked. Her voice was careful and a little thin. I had thought about how I would answer this question. I had thought about it since my brother called. I did, I said. Multiple times. You weren't interested. She looked like that landed harder than she expected. I mentioned the eBay sales when I was 20. You called it a hobby. I told you about the first storage unit when I was 23. Dad asked if I was sure I wasn't just accumulating junk. I wasn't saying this with heat. I was just describing facts. I talked about the New Jersey dealer last year. Dad said the numbers were barely minimum wage. I stopped bringing it up because there was no version of the conversation where you saw it as real. My father was looking at the edge of the table. You decided what my story was, I said, and then you only looked for evidence that confirmed it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, the things I said at dinner. He stopped. Yeah, I said. I was wrong. He said it the way he says most things, without decoration. That was wrong of me. The word I used. It was cruel, and I'm sorry. I had waited years to hear my father say those words. The strange thing was that when he finally did, they felt smaller than I thought they would. Not because they didn't matter, but because I had already built something that didn't require them. The apology didn't change anything that had already happened. It just acknowledged it. I hear you, I said, and I meant it. My mother reached out and touched my hand across the table. She looked like she was holding something back. We're proud of you, she said. I hope you know that. I thought about what I wanted to say, and I chose honesty. I know you are, I told her. Now. But that's not the same as having believed in me then. She nodded. She didn't argue. That surprised me. My brother was leaning against a shelving unit with his arms loosely crossed. He said quietly, For what it's worth, I always thought you were doing something. I just didn't know what. You could have asked, I said. He smiled a little. You're right. I could have. That was the whole conversation, more or less. No dramatic confrontation. No moment where I laid out every grievance and watched them absorb it. Just four people sitting in a warehouse on a Thursday morning, finally saying the things that should have been said a long time ago. Before they left, my father walked back through the warehouse one more time on his own. I let him. He stopped at the shelving section, near the back where I kept the items staged for the hotel contract. A curated collection of mid-century lamps, framed botanical prints, small ceramic pieces of furniture I had refinished myself, or sourced from craftspeople I had relationships with. He stood there for a while looking at the pieces. Then he said, without turning around, "You have a good eye." From my father, that was a considerable thing to say. "I know," I said, not arrogantly, just as a statement of fact, the same way he makes them. He turned around, and there was something on his face that was close to a smile, though not quite. They left around 1 o'clock. My brother lingered for a minute after our parents walked out. "That went better than I thought it would," he said. "Or worse," I said. "Depending on what you expected." He laughed. A real one. And I laughed too, because it was genuinely funny. The absurdity of all of it. The 10 years of assumptions. The dinner table. The Sunday deadline. The business magazine. My father standing in my warehouse asking me the square footage of my lease. After they all left, I went back to work. There were listings to update. An email from the hotel chain's procurement coordinator about the Q1 order. A contractor coming in at 3 to photograph a new lot I'd acquired at an estate sale in Delaware the previous weekend. The work didn't change because my parents had come to see it. The company didn't change. The quarterly revenue didn't change. The hotel chain wasn't more impressed because my father had finally visited. But something in me had shifted, just slightly, and I won't pretend it hadn't. Not because I needed their approval. I had proven to myself years ago that I could operate without it. But there's a difference between not needing something and not caring at all. I'm human. I grew up in that house. The man who said I was an embarrassment was also the man who taught me to read a spreadsheet and told me, once, when I was 12 years old and had organized my entire book collection by subject and then subcategory, that I had a good systematic mind. He had forgotten that. I hadn't. What I understood, sitting back down at my desk that Thursday afternoon, was that the narrative my parents had built about me was never really about me. It was about the map they had for what a successful life was supposed to look like. I didn't fit the map, so they assumed I was lost. It never occurred to them that I might be somewhere the map didn't show. I thought about the comment my aunt had made in the driveway, the morning I left. She had hugged me and whispered, "I don't understand what you do, but I've always believed you were doing something." I had held on to that quietly for 3 months. It was the smallest thing. It was also enough. Success, I have come to believe, is not a destination your parents recognize. It's not a degree on a wall, or a title on a door, or a photo on a mantle. It's the moment you stop measuring yourself by what they expect and start measuring yourself by what you actually built. For me, that moment had come a long time before my father walked through the door of my warehouse. He just got to see it on a Thursday in January, and I'll be honest, the look on his face when he saw it was something I will carry with me for a long time. Not because I needed it, but because I'm human, and it was real. And sometimes real things matter even when they don't change anything. I sent my brother a text that evening. It just said, "Thanks for asking before sending them." He replied, "Should have asked 10 years ago." I set my phone down and looked at the dashboard on my monitor. 3 new sales while we'd been having our family moment in the warehouse. A lamp from the 1960s to a buyer in Oregon. A framed print to someone in North Carolina. A small ceramic vase to a buyer in Vermont. The business doesn't stop because your family finally decides to believe in you. That's the thing they never teach you. By the time the people who doubted you come around, you've already been running for years without them. The approval arrives late. The work doesn't wait.